Saturday, July 19th. Hitler issues Directive 33, in which his concerns about the capacity of the Red Army to withdraw, regroup, and counterattack are apparent. Following discussions with General Franz Halder, Chief of Staff of the OKH, he orders the Chief of the OKW, Wilhelm Keitel, to instruct Marshal von Bock of Army Group Center to advance towards Moscow with only infantry forces after he has taken Smolensk. The 2nd Panzer Division of General Heinz Guderian and the 2nd Army are to head south to join the 1st Panzer Group of Marshal Edward von Kleist and launch a pincer movement against Kiev. Guderian wants to continue with his offensive towards the Russian capital, but Hitler and Keitel overrule him. Some of the Army Group Center's armored forces are sent to help Army Group North, whose march to Leningrad has been slowed down by the Russians at the river Luga. In Belgium, the SS recruits Flemish volunteers to fight on the Russian front. Stalin replies to the message from Winston Churchill, thanking him for his support and suggesting that a new front be opened on the northern coast of France or in Norway. However, the British Prime Minister believes this is impossible at this stage. Sunday, July 20th. In Russia, the Red Army has now grown to 5 million strong. 15% of these are officers, and most of them lack experience. Following the dismissal of Semyon Timonchenko, Stalin orders his commissars to get rid of any Red Army commanders deemed to be unreliable. After going round Smolensk, the panzers commanded by General Heinrich von Wittinghoff, Army Group Center, continue their rapid advance towards Moscow and capture the town of Yelnya, but they are forced to slow down their march to enable the infantry and other corps to catch up. Von Wittinghoff establishes a bridgehead on the river Desna, an excellent springboard from which to attack the Russian capital. But this salient is surrounded by the Red Army. From Leningrad, a 2nd train carrying treasures from the Hermitage Museum heads off to Sverdlovsk in the Ural Mountains. The 1st Spanish volunteers of the Blue Division arrive at the barracks of Grafenwauer in Bavaria, Germany, to join the fighting on the Eastern Front. At Hitler's headquarters in Rostenburg, Poland, the German commanders analyze the development of the campaign in the Soviet Union. For the first time, the Nazi leader appears pessimistic, saying that the results so far are not at all what was expected. Monday, July 21st. On the Russian front, 200 Luftwaffe planes bomb Moscow. It is the first airstrike against the Soviet capital. Hitler visits the headquarters of Marshal Wilhelm von Lieb, who commands Army Group North, and whose objectives are to take Leningrad and the ports of the Soviet fleet on the Baltic Sea. The Nazi leader reaffirms that for the other armies, the priority is to occupy the Crimea, strategically located on the Black Sea, the Donets Basin in the southeastern Ukraine with its coal and iron ore deposits, and the rich arable lands of the rest of the region. General Guderian asks to be allowed to take Moscow, as the panzers are in the Yelny salient 300 kilometers from the city. But the Nazi leader refuses, insisting on the main economic objectives. Later, discussing the Jewish question with Sladko Kavertnik, commander-in-chief of the Croatian army, he says Russia is a Hebrew paradise and a focus of plague which must be eradicated. In the Mediterranean, the British begin Operation Substance, the transport of supplies from Gibraltar to Malta. Tuesday, July 22nd. In Russia, Army Group North moves into Solsti and stops 20 kilometers west of Lake Ilmen, south of the city of Leningrad. The Soviets' resistance increases as they get more and more reinforcements. Furthermore, the German army's supply problems are worsening. The panzer divisions of Army Group South arrive at Monastrice, where the Soviets try to stop their advance. In the first month of the invasion, the toll is devastating for both sides. The German army has lost 97,253 soldiers, killed or wounded, and have 5,335 have been made prisoner or disappeared. The numbers of the Red Army are 350,000 dead or wounded and 819,000 taken prisoner or disappeared. In the Far East, the Japanese army occupies the air and naval bases of Vichy, France in Indochina. The Japanese announced they have made an agreement with Pétain's government for a joint protectorate. For their part, the British are worried about Singapore, which falls within the Japanese range of action. Feeling threatened by Japan, the Philippine leaders call for their army to be integrated into the U.S. force. Wednesday, July 23rd. On the Eastern Front, the Germans capture the last Russian defenders in the garrison of Brest-Litovsk, including Major Peter Gaudelov, who will be honored as a hero of the Soviet Union in later years. In Rostenburg, Poland, Hitler meets with Generals Walter von Brauchitsch and Franz Halder, the chief of the Army General Staff. The Nazi leader shows his impatience at the delays in the invasion and the fact that the victory will not come before winter as he expected. To supplement Directive 33, he orders armed units of Army Group Center to support those of the North in the taking of Leningrad. Moscow will have to wait. Halder and Brauchitsch disagree with the Nazi leader, arguing that taking Moscow would mean the downfall of the communist regime. If this is not done, the Russians could reinforce their positions in the center. What is more, Halder no longer believes that victory will come quickly because although the Russians are being weakened, they are still able to fight on. On the other hand, the Wehrmacht soldiers are tired, their supplies are not getting through, and the Luftwaffe has only 1,000 planes in service. As requested by Stalin, the British government sends a naval force made up of 2 aircraft carriers, 2 cruisers, and 6 destroyers to fight against the German ships and submarines operating in the Baltic Sea. In London, the documentary Target for Tonight, which is based on a bombing raid over Germany, has its premiere. Thursday, July 24th. In Russia, on Hitler's orders, Army Group South carries out a pincer movement to take the Ukrainian city of Uman, which has a large Jewish community. More than 17,000 people will be murdered by the Germans. This action also isolates most of the Soviet troops in Kiev. Marshal von Rundstedt attempts to encircle more than 100,000 Red Army troops in a pocket. If successful, Odessa will be left defenseless and easily accessible from the sea. In the north, the Red Army and thousands of volunteers prepare for the arrival of the German divisions by digging trenches, building bunkers, and placing all sorts of obstacles around Leningrad. The RAF begins Operation Daybreak. Groups of bombers escorted by fighter planes attack the cruisers Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, and Prince Eugen, which are anchored at the French bases of Brest and La Pallice. The operation is a total failure. In the Far East, in southern Indochina, the Japanese have deployed more than 100,000 soldiers.